made no bones. I've been completely honest. Haven't hid the ball at all in my perceptions of Warren. I found her to be dishonest. I've said as much for the last several months, but I've gotten to the point where I also now at this point believe she's just outright dangerous. Her campaign has been flailing. She's been grasping for ideas. When a campaign is relatively stable, and this makes sense, if something works, you stay with it. No need to mess with perfection, right? Or if something is showing you results, there's no need to screw with it. I can show you poll after poll after poll of Sanders surging. Take a look at this. One of the most recent polls that came out, I believe this came out today, if I'm not mistaken, this morning. For the first time, Sanders has taken the lead in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. Yes, it's only by 1 point, but keep in mind, this is his first time taking the lead, and he went up in this poll by a total of 6 points, with Biden going down 2 and Warren going down 3. Just so you can see what I'm looking at right here. NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, Sanders up 6 to take the lead for the first time in this poll. That's national. Zogby Analytics, Biden down 6, Sanders up 4. I could show you Texas. I could show you California. Here's Pew Research, Sanders 23%, Biden 17%, Klobuchar 16%, Warren behind Klobuchar in Iowa. Now, granted, I don't know the entirety of this particular poll, so take that with a grain of salt. If I go to national polling, Biden with a mild lead, but that lead has been going down a bit. But Warren is nowhere near. Like in the most recent polling, Warren is nowhere near. And if we go to Iowa, she's not even enough to qualify for delegates. If we go to New Hampshire, she's not bringing in enough to qualify for delegates. If we go to Nevada, she's not bringing enough to qualify for delegates. Come on, real clear. I need you to keep up, keep up, keep up. There we are. Yeah, 14. Not enough to qualify for delegates. And for for California, Sanders has jumped in lead of Biden. When a campaign is doing well, you don't screw around with the recipe. And I can show you a list of polls. Sanders up 7, Sanders up 5, Sanders up 6, Sanders up 3. It seems to be a trend. Again, the individual numbers are important, but important only in so much as they show and demonstrate a trend. When those trends start breaking down, you get to see movement in the race itself, providing that the trend that you're not looking at is either somebody collapsing or somebody surging. In Sanders' case, he's seeing a surge. It's almost as if he's consolidating support, but on top of consolidating support, also getting support from some of the older people who for the longest time, for the most part, have been with Biden. Those fights on Social Security has not helped Biden out in the least. But we're talking about Warren. The campaign is doing well. It doesn't screw with it. Warren has changed her moniker. This is her bus. Courage over cynicism. Courage over cynicism. I don't entirely even know what that means. Now, part of me thinks that with many of the arguments she's been making recently, she's gone into this identity stuff. It seems like she wanted to make the argument that a woman is electable because she feels like this question, or it comes across as if she feels like this is an issue that people aren't necessarily talking about directly, and she used Sanders as a prop to kind of bring this conversation up. It seems like something she's bothered by. That's the only thing I can think of what that means. Courage over cynicism. What are you being courageous about? Is she trying to make this kind of subtle case that, hey, don't be cynical with the belief that a woman like me, can't win. Be courageous and go out and vote for me. For those of you who don't necessarily listen to this particular argument with any gravity, I'll accept your thank you. The reason I say that, the politics of this is so utterly bad. You're flailing, that's one part. But think about what this reminds you of. Courage over cynicism. The woman who called herself a Native American for like 40 years, who would not come out for Standing Rock, who was not courageous enough to come out for Standing Rock, who was not courageous enough to vote for Bernie Sanders. That person is now riding around in a bus with the term courage on the side of the bus. That's phenomenal. You shouldn't be doing anything to make people remember that. On top of that, she's just downright dangerous. Warren is proposing a plan to criminalize tech companies and people, meaning putting people in jail or giving them fines for spreading disinformation, knowingly spreading disinformation. Meaning, Warren is trying to create, for all intents and purposes, a ministry of truth with the woman who called herself a Native American for 40 years, the woman who brazenly lied to a voter saying my kids went to public schools. That person is going to be the arbiter of truth. The person who wouldn't support Medicare for all, despite every time she's on a campaign stage screaming it to the hilt. That person is going to be the determining factor of what's true. That's terrifying. And by the way, I don't think her proposal is going after people for pushing Trump and Russia. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't come up. For pushing weapons of mass destruction, pretty sure that wouldn't come up. The issue with the UN inspectors, where we found out that they were being pressured and intimidated, they ran that story. Bashar al-Assad gasses people, and here's the information from the UN, and you find out, no, those people were being pressured. The media never ran the story showing that they were being pressured, never ran the story showing that what they put out was somewhat of a doctored report, and that the people who were actually doing the research came to the conclusion that a chemical weapon strike wasn't used for that particular one, and more importantly, not only was it not used, that the report was changed to make it look like it was. My point here is what's true. And basically what we're talking about is effectively stuff that the government doesn't want to be true. Meaning the government is going to have what it considers to be true. And the notion that the government is going to take this extraordinary step to essentially say, fuck the First Amendment. You can't have your say-so. As if truth and point of view is somewhat of an absolute. It is not. When media runs with a story, it is not an absolute. It is there, in some respects, opinion. Sometimes it correlates to the natural world, but sometimes, in many cases, it does not. It is a point of view. Rand Paul, earlier today, yesterday, when he made this point about asking the question to John Roberts, and they bring in this thing about Eric Shirella, whatever his name is, the leaker. Well, how about that? Will Warren be going after tech companies if they put that name out there? What about the Ukraine, making the point that the Ukraine was working with elements of the Democratic Party in order to go after Donald Trump in that last election? Does that get taken down? Does the tech companies have to pull that down because they're terrified that the government under a Democrat wouldn't necessarily want that information out there? Do you really want Warren and the Democratic Party, a party that has ran with a conspiracy theory for the last 3 years, being the arbiters of truth? And if you are okay with that, do you want Trump to have that exact same power? This is lunacy and utterly desperate. And yes, desperation sometimes takes people into weird ways, but I'm sorry, this is insane. The last thing you should want is your government to be able to impose a narrative on you and then criminalize various companies if they don't follow that narrative. Think about what we're saying for the moment. Back in Nazi Germany, Goebbels, when they first brought through the radio was a disruptive technology. That seems so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago. It was disruptive technology. FDR would use fireside chats to talk to the various people and connect with the public. Hitler would put out a massive surge of propaganda. Goebbels went so far as to, in order to stop people from hearing other points of view, not in line with Nazi Germany, to criminalize listening to those other channels. How is this any different? For all intents and purposes, what she is talking about is stopping or freezing alternate sources of information that may go against her interests, the Democratic Party's interests, or for that matter, the government's interests. Something that we have a First Amendment to explicitly not allow. That's dangerous. On top of that, she came up with the weirdest, most bizarre pandering session that I think I've ever seen in my life. This campaign is an outright disaster. I am going to show you a woman ensconced in identity politics, abandoned for the most part the economic message. Maybe abandoned is too strong, but for the most part, she has started going into this notion of identity. This campaign has hit the skids, and whoever told her this was a good idea, you need to fire that person. Welcome to a bleary-eyed, late in the evening, long day at the office soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. This content is literally brought to you by you because they demonetize these videos constantly. Look, I am not a fan of Warren's. I want people, my candidates, to be honest. That's all. I'm sick of the politicians saying one thing and then doing something else. And if it comes across to me that you're being inauthentic, then you're damn sure not getting my vote. And not just not getting my vote, you're going to get a lot of ire from this particular channel. Not to run in 2016, decide to run in 2020 when it was pretty clear Sanders was going to run. He opened the space and then run the race in a way where you pretend I'm Bernie Sanders with a vagina and 10 years younger. And so any policy that Bernie Sanders has supported in the past, you come up with your own version, for the most part, that go part of the way. But then the question becomes, well, wait a minute, does she really believe that? Now, you were able to convince a few people, but me on this channel kept saying she has bad political instincts. This will be a disaster. And not just bad political instincts, it would be a disaster. She doesn't mean it. She doesn't mean it. She's saying whatever she has to say to get from point A to point B. The information came out about Medicare for all. You could see her on the campaign trail talking about it, and she would say something else when she got on the debate stage. She was not being honest in her appraisal of this stuff and the way that she was talking to it with the public. Fortunately, when she changed her strategy and said, I'm for a public option, but I'm going to fight like hell in 3 years when I have a weaker Congress, they realized, oh, she's full of it. Because what does that mean for other policies? Meaning if you're telling people for the last 3-4 months, I'm with Bernie, I'm with Bernie, I'm with Bernie, I'm for Medicare for all, I'm for Medicare for all. And then when people start to inquire a little bit further and you put out your plan, and it's like, wait, you voted for Trump's military budgets, but you're going to use the military budget to help pay for Medicare for all? And it's like an immigration. You're also going to have an immigration to pay for Medicare for all. And you're not going to have a payroll tax to help pay for Medicare for all. Everywhere else in the world there's a payroll tax, but you're not going to do that. You don't think that those companies will still cut wages in order to compensate for, like, there were all sorts of problems with what she put out in which a lot of people said she's not being serious. And then she finally comes out with her plan and she was not being serious. Well, Warren, who has found an utter and outright collapse in the polling at this point, is grasping for straws to find anything, any life raft, any source of salvation that she can drag herself onto to keep her afloat. This pandering session that you're about to see in Iowa is not going to help in that cause. If I said, I'm going to show you a video where Warren said she's going to find somebody missing a leg, and missing 3 teeth in order to choose who she uses for her, I don't know, Department of Health person. You would be like, dude, get the fuck out of here. Warren, nobody in their right mind is going to choose somebody with a bad leg, missing a few teeth to choose it. Not so much that the individual wouldn't necessarily be chosen. I mean, you can't find somebody to do the job that may have those characteristics, but more so, nobody is going to go into the process looking for somebody like that. And you'd be right. You'd be right, but only moderately so. Elizabeth Warren is making the argument that she's going to find a trans person that went through the public school system to choose the next education secretary. You heard that right. Let's hear her say it.
Over and over. For my Secretary of Education, the first, it has to be someone who's taught in a public school. Hello? And part two.
By the way, the irony of this, her own kids didn't go to public schools. The irony of this is her own kids didn't go to public schools. When that woman asked Elizabeth Warren, I think she was being paid by charter schools or something like that, to essentially harass Warren, and she said, I heard your kids went to private schools. And she says, no, my kids went to public schools. Just brazen lie. I mean, like a lie that you can just look up within a 2-minute search to prove wrong. And yet it took no bones about just telling that woman a lie in that way. But let's keep going. You know, I'm pretty sure Warren is not going to have herself fined for essentially flagrantly lying to a voter or having the tech companies take it down because she was flagrantly lying to a voter. But let's hear finish.
Because it came from a young trans person who asked about a welcoming community. And I said, it starts with a Secretary of Education who has a lot to do with where we spend our money, with what gets advanced in our public schools, with what the standards are. And I said, I'm going to have a Secretary of Education that this young trans person interviews on my behalf. And only if this person believes that our Secretary...
This is problematic on a few points, right? I mean, she has a little bit more to say on this, but right off the bat, this is problematic. Why are you having a young trans person choose your Secretary of Education? Am I wrong? Is that bizarre? Is all hell? A, I don't know who the fuck this person is. Meaning, why should I care about their particular point of view? B, isn't that your job? Isn't that your job? Aren't you the candidate? Isn't it your job to make the choice on who you choose for that particular office? I have to be honest, I'm less concerned about whether a quote-unquote random trans person chooses the Department of Education person. There are, 320 million people in this country? I don't know the number that, go to school or that's been through our public school system, but the person has to cater to all of those groups. And it is an infinitely bizarre scenario to say, I'm going to get a random trans person to interview people for Department of Education. I mean, this is so bizarre to me. And yet she's saying this into a crowd of people. And it's hard to read their faces on this, but I would hope that they would be like, what the fuck is she talking about? Let's let her finish.
Of Education nominee is who is committed to creating a welcoming environment, a safe environment, and a full educational curriculum for everyone. Will that person actually be advanced to be Secretary of Education?
So just to be clear, you want to have an education system that's open for everyone. In order to get an education system that's open to everyone, you're going to find a random trans person to choose that person. Because, yeah, finding a random trans person totally is going to make sure education is for everybody. This is so bizarre. This is worse than the hat sauce pandering by Hillary Clinton. You can have an education system where you have an open environment from the standpoint of policy of the way you want your education system run. Fair enough. You should have a welcome environment for schools. Yes, I agree. My issue here is in advance saying some random trans person is going to choose that person. I just find that to be so utterly bizarre to me. If you choose a trans person for your education secretary, as long as they can do the job, I don't care. If you choose a black person, white, gay, straight, somewhere in between, I don't care. I care about whether or not they can do the job. I care about whether or not they have the policy agenda being set in a way that I ideologically agree with. If the people are putting you in that office, ideally they are putting you in that office because they want your vision of the political space espoused. The notion you're delegating that to some kid, I just find that to be utterly bizarre. This is identity politics gone off the rails. I mean, come on. Warren started her campaign pretending to be Bernie Sanders. Medicare for all, Social Security, getting rid of most of student debt. Across the board, if Sanders did it, If he's a 10, I'm going to go to a 9.2. Okay, that's who you were running up until the point you started to collapse in the polls. And now your courage over cynicism, and now you're finding trans people to essentially choose your education secretary. Talk about a fail. Flailing and failing. Waddling at the speed of molasses to a defeat. Marcus Will, do you think Warren will ask Bernie to endorse her? She might. You know what's funny? That's now funny for an entirely different reason. Omar P., the random trans person that Warren will recruit is probably a right-winger, Caitlyn Jenner. You know, the funny part about that, when you used to say that, it used to scare the shit out of me because my thought was, oh, fuck, she's in lead. She could potentially win this thing, all those type of things. That woman has horrible political instincts. She would get bullied by Trump. Those were my thoughts. And I was like, God, this will suck so bad. At this point, Warren is collapsing. And I can go through multiple states. Now, so that's why that question gets funny for an entirely opposite reason. This race is between Sanders and Biden. That's who the race is between. And I understand there'd be some people who think, look, I've said before, I think I've said this like a month ago, I thought Sanders was going to win this. I have a certain degree of bias in this, so fair enough. But looking at the trend line now, I feel a hell of a lot more comfortable in that particular, let's say, prognostication. And my concern with Warren is not that she would win. It's more so that she would be able to sap enough support away so that somebody like Joe Biden can limp across the finish line, or at the very least sap enough support where they can get this kind of delegate math to force a second round. That's my only concern with Warren. Not about whether or not she can win. I don't think she can win at all. Trudy, Vicious E, her plan was to inherit us and our cash. Titus, Warren will come out as a transgender just before the Super Bowl Tuesday. Oh, that's funny. Pat Hacker, we had a male transsexual teacher in our public high school back in the 90s. And guess what? He was accepted by students and parents alike. Yeah, I don't... Look, if you're talking about the left, they have no issue with you putting in somebody of mixed race, gender, sexuality, any of that stuff. And so this argument that you're making, at least from the standpoint of the Democratic Party electorate, it's almost somewhat of a moot point, right? We want a school system that is opening and welcoming and so forth, especially if it's a public school system. My only issue here is the level of pandering where identity has taken such a high regard in Warren's campaign that she calls Sanders sexist to some degree and used him as a prop to make some argument about whether or not a woman could win. And it's now gone so far into this kind of weird area where she's talking about getting a random trans person to help her choose education secretary. A, why is it just one person making that choice? How do you choose the person who's going to make that choice? Why aren't you making that choice? Why are you delegating that particular responsibility to a trans person? Are there other groups that also have difficulties potentially with integrating in the school system that may not necessarily feel all that welcomed? And if so, how are you limiting this to a trans person? Is a trans person's pain more than the pain of somebody? Like, this gets really weird on a few counts to me, but it all boils down to a campaign that's flailing, waddling, and failing. Yeah, I'm gonna end this here. I saw this and I was like, God, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Again, I want a welcoming school system. It's not that. But this comes across as a hot sauce in the purse thing. Or Bill Clinton playing the saxophone. Oh, he's the first black president. That type of stuff. It's pandering on issues of identity. And it almost seems as if she realizes that the economic argument for her has collapsed. The liberal vote has gone to Sanders. The school vote has gone to Sanders, meaning college vote has gone to Sanders. So I think what she realizes was that the constituencies that she was trying to pull in order to win this, where she was going to get a little bit from like the Biden side, con some of the Sanders supporters, and get enough of a coalition to try to make it work, I think she realizes it has utterly and entirely collapsed. And with that strategy collapsing, she's pivoted to this these other plans, courage over cynicism, which again sounds funny to me and something you probably shouldn't bring up. This new plan of essentially going after independent media channels, putting out information she doesn't like, that's just downright fascistic. And this weird, bizarre video of having a young trans person interview her Secretary of Education. Drop out and support Sanders. Drop out. This is getting ridiculous at this point. I mean, for fuck's sake. If you're telling me you want big structural change, good. Get out the race and back Sanders. If you're telling me that we need a renegotiation about political system and all this, great. Get out and support the guy that will actually do that. And if you are telling me that this woman has a good chance of beating Trump with these political instincts, I think you're delirious. We dodged a bullet with Warren collapsing in this way. We completely dodged a bullet. Like, share, subscribe. Trudy, she will endorse Joe Biden. Trudy, I wouldn't be shocked by that in the least. Wouldn't be shocked in the least. And maybe it would even serve Bernie Sanders right. The reason I say that is you've acted like this woman was your friend. You wouldn't touch her, wouldn't lay a glove on her. She pretended and aped you this entire campaign. And I know you had to know she didn't mean it. And yet you still wouldn't say anything about it. And you acted as if you two were friends. You might be her friend. She wasn't your friend back in 2016. And even now, ultimately, she is only injuring you the longer she stays in this race. I wouldn't be shocked in the least if Warren came out and did not endorse Sanders or stays in the race long enough to get just enough delegates to try to help Joe Biden across the finish line. She is working with Clinton behind the scenes. Clinton hates Sanders' guts. Whether Warren is running as a thing unto herself or as a proxy for something else, it could be a little bit of both. I don't know which, but that makes me not trust her at all. Why on earth would you trust Hillary Clinton? Why? And I'm not saying Warren is Clinton, but if Warren is working with Clinton behind the scenes in a way she doesn't want you to know about it, why do you trust that? Fortunately, potentially, we've dodged a bullet. The question becomes, how long does Warren stay in this race? And when she finally, inevitably, at some point, get out of the race, who is she going to endorse? And for those people that think she's going to automatically endorse Sanders, it is possible, but I don't know that, especially not as a flat fact. Like, share, and subscribe.